I'm fortunate this year to be at the Toronto International Film Festival, where more than half of the films that were produced this year were by female filmmakers. And I was also very pleasantly surprised to see the number of films produced by African filmmakers or about African subjects. And I'm very fortunate to be joined today by one of the amazing filmmakers. Her name is Anjali. Anjali, welcome. Thank you very much for being here.
It's a pleasure to speak with you this morning.
Thank you. So you're screening a film. Tell us about the film.
Our film is called Silas. It's about a tireless Liberian environmental crusader, and he works with his entire generation of young people using technology, using their pure stubbornness to kind of hold their government to account. So it's really the story of one of their investigations over a period of 5 years.
And how did this story come about? How did you find Silas?
I didn't start out as a filmmaker. I actually was an environmental scientist before I became a filmmaker. And I was always looking for different ways to tell these issues and explain and kind of break down how a whole tract of land from a country could be kind of sold off to a foreign corporation, or how that actually happens and what it means. And so when I interviewed Silas Siakor, the main character for the story, in a journalistic article years before, it just came to me that he was the perfect voice for this type of story. He was so kind of, passionate about the issue, but also had this interesting kind of dynamic in his family life where his wife isn't the perfect activist. His wife is a real normal person like the rest of us, and wants comforts and wants happiness and stuff like that. So the combination between the two of them was really fantastic.
So tell us about the process. So was it a difficult sell to convince him to do the film?
Our main character is incredibly humble, so he would much rather be writing things or be in court systems instead of in front of a camera. When we first started the film, it was really about, okay, let's talk about what your organization is doing. Let's make it, a big film about this entire group of young people. But it quickly became clear that we needed somebody to hang the story on, and we needed somebody to help guide us through the intricacies of an environmental subject. And he's so passionate and he's so charismatic in that way, and it just seemed like the right fit.
And so you said it was a 5-year process. Where did you start? How did you know where to start?
Well, all films take blood, sweat, and tears, literally. It started from a research shoot in 2011. After I interviewed him, I basically used whatever I could to get to Liberia and spend some time there. And then after that, it was just a period of time. We didn't live in country when we were making this film, so that was probably a difference between some of the films that I've made before, which was a lot more easy access. It's incredibly expensive to fly from Kenya to Liberia, so there were restrictions that we had that I hadn't really experienced in my previous films. But we were there for the moments where the key events along the way that happened, and really it was just a process like every other film where you're following a story. You don't exactly know where you're going to end up, but you have to evolve with the twists and turns. And there definitely is a few twists in the story along the way, and we just had to accommodate for that and think, okay, how are we going to structure this in a film structure, in a 3-act structure?
So over 5 years, I'm going to guess there were a lot of challenging moments, a lot of challenging things that happened. What would you say were some of the biggest challenges you faced?
I think most filmmakers would say the editing process is the most challenging, but I think that filming this was also incredibly challenging. I was just speaking earlier with some of our team and thinking back to, 1 2-minute scene in the film was like an 8-hour walk into the bush and 40 degrees with no water half of the time. We all physically got hurt in the process of this film numerous times. I ended up in the hospital, well, not a hospital, but a kind of waiting room, getting stitches in my leg and everything like that. So it was just a really difficult film to make, for sure. And from the start to the finish, when you're talking about very nuanced subjects over, that are political, environmental, legal-based, trying to weave that as well all the way to the end when we finished about a week ago, before TIFF. That was really the process. It was hard from beginning to end.
And I watched it, and partway through, you also faced the challenge of Ebola. Like, how did that impact the filming?
You know, whatever we faced as filmmakers, which was an incredible kind of empathy and fear for the community, like we just had to put ourselves in everybody that was on the ground the whole time through the Ebola process. I was actually finishing another film at the time, so wasn't there filming, but we had a crew of people. You know, this was a collaboration of a number of videographers, cinematographers, and so on. A lot of people with mobile phones, so the kind of democratization of the film was really interesting. But no matter how it was hard for the film, it was way more difficult for the subjects that were on the ground, and we just had to keep that conscious. I think we often worried that whatever we were doing could create a problem, or that we were putting people in positions where they might get sick, or and that was something that was really deep to take on. So it was a balance between making sure that people stayed safe and making sure that this incredibly, tragic part of the history, which really points to a lot of system failures that were going on in terms of governance, that was documented.
One of the things that you do so beautifully in the film is, as you said, it's a multi-layered film. You show the complexity of the relationship, as you mentioned Silas's wife at the beginning, and the complexity of her feelings about his work and how it impacts their family. Like, tell me about that and the whole dynamic that they face there.
Yeah. So Silas is very unforgiving, and you see that in his activism and how he treats everything that he's doing. He's a bit of, I wouldn't say like a full robot, but like he has some tendencies that he's so unforgiving when it comes to corruption and so on. And I think it's because it's a really slippery slope when you start to make concessions for things. So on the other hand, his wife comes from like a completely different background, and she just wants nice things and wants and the duality of that, which I think we all face, is what I thought was really quite special. Is we all have a little bit of Silas in us, and we all have a little bit of Marley, and I think that play is what's really, really interesting. So Silas, will constantly be saying, okay, we don't need everything. We don't need all of this stuff. We don't need all of these things that create problems in the world, and Marley just wants another pair of shoes or another dress. So there is a scene at the end of the film that was a little bit of an inside joke for us, where Silas puts his 3 shirts that he owns, which are basically the same shirt in slightly different shades, and he's like ironing them and so on. And there was a moment in the film when we were filming it where we see this conversation. We didn't end up putting it in the film, where Marley's making fun of Silas for having like 4 shirts, and he says to Marley, well, that's because you don't leave me any space in the closet. So it was interesting, but Marley is also adds this entire kind of human dimension, and she's the type of woman that allows Silas to do what he does, because you can't be like that in life if you don't have somebody that's going to make sure that the rent is paid. And Marley's an incredibly distinguished woman. She's an acupuncturist. She has her own clinic. I'm sure if you looked out at the finances of the relationship, she's probably bringing in the mounted share of running the household, making sure the kids are okay. So that dynamic is also really interesting, because she's not a supporter. She really, she runs the house. She runs the business. She runs their life. And that enables somebody like Silas to kind of take the high road. So I really like that duality as well. And it was really important to show that she's a businesswoman, that she's taking care of everything in the family.
And what's their response been to the film? I mean, you had the premiere at TIFF a few days ago. What was Silas's response seeing it with an audience?
He was really happy, I think, to be part of this ending phase of just seeing where it could go, and seeing how portraying this type of long journey could impact not only his communities and the groups that he works with, which is what he does on a daily basis, but also share that message with the world. And that was really nice to see. We actually showed a rough cut to him and his wife maybe a month before. And the reason was was because we were worried that there could be some security implications for Silas and his wife. And we were like, what do we do? Like, what if something happens? What if this narrative actually puts them in harm's way? So this wasn't the first time that he'd kind of seen the structure, but at that time, Silas' reaction was, you know, this is bigger than me, it's bigger than the presidency, this is really kind of what we need to be talking about. And whatever security implications there are for me, it's worth it. Marley was just really interested in the dynamic. I think she, like, for the first time saw that how their role is, and that was really beautiful to see. And she just loved seeing, like, Silas dancing. I think that was the most hilarious thing for her, because he does have these two characters in his personality, where it's like the business Silas and then the I've had a drink Silas. So that was really nice too.
Now, something that was shown throughout the film was actually there was some software solution, some product that they were using. Can you tell me about what was that, and where is it from, and what does it do?
Sure. The project is called Timbi, or This Is My Backyard. And it's actually a collaboration of the film team and Silas and the Sustainable Development Institute. So when we were thinking of first making the film, a lot of it was about how are we gonna tell the story beneath the headlines? You know, how are we actually gonna be able to be there out in the field and gather documentation of how communities lose their land? It's incredibly hard if you rock up with a whole bunch of lights and the crew, and nothing's going to happen like real life. And so what we decided was, you know, one way of democratizing the narrative, not only collecting this information, but allowing people to choose what was important, was to have a collection mechanism on their mobile phones, because mobile phones, as we know, are everywhere now. So you go into community, even if you have a mobile phone, everybody else has got a mobile phone too. So that was the kind of first step. But SDI and Silas really said, well, if you don't design it around us, our workflow, if you don't make us the focus and make sure that this is useful to our work long term, then nobody's going to use it. So you really have to take that approach. And so the team worked with a whole bunch of developers, and we actually created an app and an investigative dashboard and a whole kind of end-to-end system from the moment you're in the field to the moment you're, like, publishing stories and putting them out there to the press. And that was really just to kind of see what the narrative would be coming out of these communities. And we focused on one or two, like, strands of that narrative in the film, but they've got an entire dashboard that's full of these really intricate stories that also could be broken down into narratives. So it was really interesting to go through that process, create that with them iteratively, design it around them, and then see that as part of the outreach mechanism of the film. So in the future, we're not only spreading the message of, like, what you can do in your backyard, you're also kind of provided with a software solution that can help you build the groups that you want to, a technical tool.
And so right now, is that app being used, is it just in Liberia, or is it spread beyond?
Yeah, I think we've got about 15 countries right now. So in a lot of the countries, it's by word of mouth, and it's been a lot of countries that face similar issues. The Republic of Congo, like Congo-Brazzaville, DRC, we're working with a group in CAR at the moment, Kenya, a South African group, we're also growing it there. And then there's other groups in Solomon Islands, in Chile, in Indonesia. So it's in English, French, Spanish, Swahili, and we've just put it into Arabic right now as well. So it's great. It's a wonderful kind of grassroots project that started in that really land basis, and now is growing into a whole bunch of different domains, a lot to do with women and land, actually, and some in maternal health care, like health services delivery, so lots of different topics.
And what was your intention when you started down this path? What did you hope this film would do, and has it done what you hoped it would do?
Yeah, I think it was really important from the beginning to see how we could create an environmental story and talk about these issues in a way that didn't feel like an environmental story. Sometimes when you walk into an environmental film, you feel like you're going to walk out, like, really negative about the state of affairs, that everything is going to be, everything is going to be negative and everything is like falling apart and climate change is happening and there's no turning back and we've ruined everything. And to kind of turn that on the head and say, okay, what are the homegrown solutions? What can one person do to make a difference? And then really follow that through and make it more kind of an investigation, make it more interesting in terms of like a 3-act structure, and that we could see something that happened in one of these communities. We didn't know that that's how it would unfold, but that's what we hoped. And because there were so many different things that they were working on, we kind of had our share of choices in how we worked on that. So I think it was not only wanting to make a film that resonated with people, that didn't feel like the end of the world, that showed the power of what we can all do, but also, it's a documentary and you never really know where you're going to end up.
So completely switching gears and moving to another documentary that you produced. Tell me about your previous documentary, the one that you released last year.
Yeah, so this Silas was released this year at TIFF. It was our world premiere. We were really excited about it. And last year, so it's been back to back. Last year, I premiered a film called Gunrunners at Hot Docs Film Festival here in Toronto.
When you have a gun, you have power. You feel like nobody can kill you. But when somebody kills you, you think about anything that can help you to run away.
And that film is about 2 warriors. They call themselves warriors, but they're cattle rustlers who trade in their AK-47s for running shoes in the dream of marathon running. So the film takes place in mostly in northern Kenya and then like northwestern Kenya, along the Rift Valley, a place that is kind of notorious for cattle rustling and raiding and violence and stuff like that. And it was really the story of 2 men, 2 friends who are going through this journey together of change. And a lot of the times when you think about redemption and so on, it's this opportunity, okay, I've given up my gun and now I have a better life. And it doesn't really always work like that. That's the beginning of the story. So similarly, I started out as a journalist and an environmental journalist and so on, and I ran into the story and covered it, these guys giving up their guns. And I thought, gosh, this is actually not the end of the story, this is the beginning of the story. And so I followed their friendship over the course of 10 years, where they had to make really difficult decisions about what was most important to them, whether it was community, whether it was their own personal ambitions, whether it was family, and you see that play out. And so it starts in northern Kenya and it finishes in New York. So it's really the kind of American dream type story.
So 10 years is a really long time. Like, how did you keep going for 10 years? And were there ever moments where you thought, maybe not, let me stop this?
I think in any documentary project, you question whether you can keep going a lot of times. I don't think that is something that's unique out of these projects. I think it's really hard. It's like having a child. It's like doing a PhD. It's like really hard, and they often take multiple years. That particular project, it was interesting because it was about marathon runners, and we always made this like parallel between what they were doing, the marathons that they were running, and how you like hit like a wall often at 30 or 35 kilometers. And it was really interesting because it was very much the same in my experience. And in as much as we were working on their ability to kind of pull through and finish the race and finish strong, we were talking about my ability to kind of pull through and finish the documentary. And everybody took it as seriously. I was so invested in their kind of performance. Obviously, as when you're following somebody for 10 years, like you're just rooting for them the whole way. And I think similarly, they, you know, in the moments of indecision, in the moments where I didn't think I could go further, they very much stepped up and said, listen, we got to finish this film. We started something, we got to finish it. Not because they wanted to do any more re-recordings or interviews or do any of that type of stuff, but because they realized that that's just the process that we all had to go through. And it was really a coming of age experience for both them and for myself. We were figuring out what we wanted to do in life. This was like the first big step for all of the two characters and myself.
And then I know, unfortunately, you were struck by tragedy in the making of this film. Can you tell us about that, share about that?
Yeah, sure. About a month before our world premiere, one of my main characters and his wife were in a car accident. And they were actually leaving a weekend that we had all kind of been together and so on, and they were, you know, nearing their community. And then their passenger vehicle was hit by an oncoming truck. So I'm a little bit better about talking about it now than I used to, but it was definitely a bittersweet moment because the film is really about, you know, change and what it takes to change your life and all these types of things. And when we got to that point where things were just turning around, their lives were ended. And so premiering the film and telling that story has always been, you know, it's not been as exciting, I suppose, as this story, just because there was so much responsibility that we all felt for their family and their kids. They took care of very much in, you know, they had 3 biological kids, but they took care of 4 other kids as well. So it was, well, you know, it was a matter of figuring out how are we going to band together and really take care of these young people. And one of the biggest things about that particular character, Robert Matanda, was how much he did for his kids and the education. He, you know, he had difficulties along his path, and there's definitely questions that I asked along the way about his place in the world and how straightforward he was and everything, but one thing that was really true to that was what he did it for, and that was always for his kids. So he might have done all these random things, but he was a really, really good father, and he took care of his kids and wanted to make sure that they had an education and had a better chance than he did. So we've put together an entire kind of GoFundMe campaign, and we've created a board and a trust in Kenya, and so all of us are really taking part in raising money and looking after kids. We've hired a social worker who checks on the kids every 2 weeks. She spends the weekend with them. And we've done a lot of therapy, both in their communities, but also brought them down to Nairobi, just because there was a lot of things that kind of came up through time. At first, the first year was really about like making sure everything was in place and making sure that, you know, even without their parents, that the rest of the structure of their life stayed the same in terms of education and support, church, community, everything. And then this year, since January, I guess this year, it's really been about, okay, starting to dig further with the kids and where emotionally they are at, what they're feeling, and getting a hold of that, because that definitely has come up and been harder in the last year.
So I know that they had their daughter with them in the car, yeah, who survived, and that daughter's name is Anjali. Was she named after you?
Yeah, she was. Actually, I think it was the first time I met Robert Matanda. It was back in like 2006, or maybe the second time I met him, and he told me that if he ever had a girl child, he would name her after me. And then it was fast forward 6 years later, and you never really expect people to do that. 6 years later, he named his daughter after me, which was so sweet. She's an incredible young, well, she's no longer a baby. I always call her a baby. We call her Anjali Ndogo, so small Anjali. But yeah, she's 5 now, so she's doing amazing. She's so great at school and stuff like that. But she's also obviously traumatized from what she's been through. And she was in the car. And she saw her parents pass away. There was a moment, you know, there was a few hours between the time that she was rescued from the car. She was only one of 2 people that survived the passenger vehicle. So there's a lot of stuff that's behind there, for sure.
What would you want her to know or remember about her parents?
Just that they did, I would want her to remember that they did everything for her, that she was the apple of their eyes, and she was the only girl child, I suppose, in the family, and they just absolutely, everybody in the family is still like absolutely in love with her. I think, you know, what we've decided or what we've realized over the course of this documentary is that was our gift to them. Not only the education and making sure, I mean, we still have about 15 years of supporting her until she is probably on her own 2 feet, you know, and supporting the entire group of kids. So there's always going to be that support, but it'll always be something that she can come back to and watch the film and know the importance of that family life and remember. And she still does, you know, she'll watch parts of the film and she'll be very engaged with her parents and stuff. So it's been a process, but I think what we just have to remember is in all these films that I kind of make is what is the power of one person and what can we do? And if we can do it, then we have to. And that's really the approach that we've taken also with fundraising and trying to support these children.
So I'll ask you the last question, if I may. Thank you so much. So Ndini is the name of this project, and Ndini in my mother tongue means I am. So finish that sentence for me. I am.
I am a storyteller. I am a daughter. I'm a sister. I'm also an aunt. We call it masi in our language. I'm a human. I have faults. And I'm doing my best. I think that that's what I would say. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anjali. I really appreciate it. Thank you.